Chapter 1. The Neighbor. The late afternoon sunlight cast long, warm shadows across the streets of San Francisco as Anna Davis pulled her car into the garage below her loft. The familiar hum of the city surrounded her, but inside, she felt detached, floating above the noise, above the daily chaos that seemed to entangle everyone else. That detachment had become her armor, her survival strategy since the divorce. Her life now consisted of precision, control, and independence. No room for mess. No room for vulnerability. She pushed the door open to her apartment and was greeted by the comforting sight of her minimalist living space. The white walls, sleek furniture, and tastefully selected art gave off a sterile calm, mirroring her inner state, or at least the version of herself she was trying to maintain. Every piece of furniture had a purpose, every angle clean and deliberate, much like the way she had organized her emotions since her husband walked out 2 years ago. Setting her keys on the narrow entry table, Anna moved to the large windows overlooking the street. It was only then she noticed the moving truck in front of the building next door. Boxes stacked haphazardly, movers speaking loudly as they carried furniture and belongings inside. She didn't recall the previous neighbor leaving, but that wasn't surprising. She wasn't one to keep tabs on those living around her. The thought of meeting someone new made her uneasy. Anna sighed and turned back to her desk, already buried in client sketches for the new office redesign project. She loved her work, perhaps too much, but it had become her refuge, something she could control when the rest of her life had spun out of her hands. She picked up a pencil and began refining the lines of a custom bookcase, letting herself sink into the details. Time slipped away, as it always did when she was lost in her designs. A knock on the door pulled her back to reality. She wasn't expecting anyone. Anna hesitated, her fingers still wrapped around the pencil as if holding on to her focus. Reluctantly, she got up and opened the door. Standing in the hallway was a man, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed casually in a well-worn leather jacket. His brown hair was slightly tousled, as if he'd run his fingers through it a few too many times. He smiled, the kind of easy, charming smile that immediately put people at ease. But Anna didn't relax. She rarely did. "Hey, sorry to bother you," he began, his voice smooth, confident. "I just moved in next door. Thought I'd introduce myself." He extended his hand. "Ethan Caldwell." Anna's eyes flicked to his hand for a second before she took it, her grip firm but brief. "Anna Davis," she replied, keeping her tone neutral. "I saw the movers today," she added, gesturing toward the street. "Big move?" "Yeah, it's been a long day. I was hoping to finish unpacking tonight, but you know how that goes," he said, flashing another smile. "But I'm here now. Fresh start and all that." Something about his words, fresh start, echoed in her. She had made her own fresh start in this very building, convincing herself that she could shut the door on her old life and move forward unscathed. She knew better now. No one truly got a clean slate. "Well, welcome to the neighborhood," Anna said, forcing herself to offer a polite smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. Ethan nodded, his gaze sweeping briefly around her loft. "Nice place. Really well put together. It's what I do for a living. Interior design," she explained, feeling the familiar walls go up again. Small talk was not her forte. "That makes sense," he said, glancing back at her. "I might need some tips. My place is a bit of a disaster right now." There was a pause, an opening for her to offer help, but Anna didn't take it. Instead, she shifted on her feet, ready to wrap up the conversation. "Well, I'm sure you'll get it sorted," she said, keeping her tone polite but distant. Ethan didn't seem to take offense. He just smiled again, as if he was used to people being guarded around him. "Right, well, if you ever need anything, feel free to knock." With that, he turned to leave, but before he stepped out of the doorway, he paused and glanced over his shoulder. "By the way," he said, almost as an afterthought, "you were married to Jacob Whitman, right?" Anna's breath caught. His name, sliced through her like a knife. She hadn't heard anyone say it in a long time. Not since she had scrubbed him from her life, every trace of him gone from her apartment, her social media, her mind. Or at least she tried. "How do you?" Anna started, her voice shaky, but she quickly steadied herself. "Yes. How did you know that?" Ethan's expression softened. "We have mutual friends." "Sorry, I didn't mean to bring up something sensitive." The air in the room seemed to thin, her pulse quickening. She wasn't sure if it was anger or panic bubbling up, but she hated the feeling of being exposed, of someone knowing more about her than she had willingly shared. "I'm over it," Anna said curtly, though the words felt like a lie even as they left her lips. Ethan held up his hands in a placating gesture. "Didn't mean to pry. Like I said, I just moved here. I'll let you get back to your night." He offered her one last smile, then turned and left. As the door clicked shut, Anna found herself standing in the center of her immaculate loft, feeling anything but composed. Chapter 2: A New Project. The sound of a phone vibrating on the glass table jolted Anna from her work. She glanced at the screen, surprised to see her boss's name flashing. Danielle, her mentor and founder of the design firm she worked for, rarely called during office hours. They usually communicated via email unless something urgent came up. "Hey, Danielle," Anna answered, putting down the sketch she had been working on. "What's up?" Danielle's voice was crisp, but there was an undercurrent of excitement. "Anna, I've got a major opportunity for you." The Caldwell Group, a high-end architecture firm, reached out for a complete redesign of their headquarters. "It's a big deal. They need someone to take charge of the project immediately, and I think you're the perfect fit. It'll be a lucrative contract if we land it." Anna paused, her fingers tightening around her phone. "The Caldwell Group," she repeated, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Yes, one of the top firms in San Francisco. Their lead architect is Ethan Caldwell," Anna interrupted, already knowing where this was headed. "Her neighbor." "Of course. Exactly. You've heard of him, then? He's the one who requested you, by the way." Anna's heart skipped a beat. Requested her? She wasn't sure whether to feel flattered or uneasy. After their brief, somewhat uncomfortable exchange, she hadn't expected to see Ethan again, at least not so soon, and definitely not in a professional setting. "When does it start?" Anna asked, keeping her tone composed. "Tomorrow. They want a preliminary meeting to go over the scope of the project. I know it's short notice, but I trust you can handle it." "Of course," Anna replied automatically. She had never turned down an opportunity like this before. There was no reason to start now, even if the circumstances made her uncomfortable. "I'll be ready." The next day, Anna found herself standing in the sleek, glass-walled lobby of the Caldwell Group. The place radiated modernity and sophistication, from the high ceilings and minimalist artwork to the polished concrete floors. It was the kind of space she normally thrived in, a blank canvas just waiting for her to work her magic. Except this time, she couldn't shake the nervous energy buzzing inside her. As she waited for the receptionist to notify Ethan of her arrival, Anna glanced around, noticing the meticulous attention to detail in the office's design. It was elegant, but not overly done, a balance of form and function that reflected the architecture firm's reputation. Yet something about the space felt cold, impersonal. The kind of place where relationships were transactional, and boundaries were carefully maintained. Much like the relationship she was about to navigate with Ethan. Ethan's voice pulled her from her thoughts. She turned to see him approaching with his usual confident stride, dressed in a tailored suit that seemed perfectly at home in this environment. "Welcome to the Caldwell Group," he said, extending his hand. His smile was professional, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of something deeper, an acknowledgement of their strange situation. "I hope the place isn't too intimidating." Anna shook his hand, her touch brief but firm. "I've seen more intimidating spaces," she replied, her tone cool. Ethan chuckled softly. I suppose you have. He gestured toward the hallway. Shall we? They walked through the open-plan office, past teams of architects and designers huddled over blueprints and screens, their conversations a low hum of productivity. Ethan led Anna to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. It was a breathtaking view, but Anna barely noticed. As they sat down, Ethan handed her a file with the project details. We're looking to completely overhaul the space. The company's growing rapidly, and we want the office to reflect that, something modern, but still functional and comfortable for our team. Anna nodded, flipping through the pages. I can see a lot of potential here. Do you have a specific vision in mind, or should I take the lead on concepts? We trust your instincts, Ethan replied, leaning back in his chair. That's why I requested you for the project. There it was again, that. Anna couldn't ignore the subtle tension between them, the unspoken acknowledgement that their connection went beyond this professional setting. She wanted to focus on the work, to bury herself in the details like she always did, but Ethan's presence was making that difficult. Why me? She asked, keeping her eyes on the file in front of her. Ethan's expression softened. You have a reputation for designing spaces that aren't just beautiful but feel personal, lived in. That's rare in this industry. I think you could bring something unique to this project. It was a good answer, but Anna couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. She could sense Ethan watching her, but she refused to meet his gaze. Instead, she focused on the notes, scribbling down ideas for layouts and material choices. Still, his words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications she didn't want to acknowledge. Later that afternoon, as Anna walked back to her car, she felt the familiar pull of frustration. She had told herself countless times that she wouldn't let personal distractions interfere with her work, especially after what happened with Jacob. She had learned her lesson, hadn't she? But there she was, struggling to suppress the growing attraction she felt toward Ethan, despite her better judgment. Sitting behind the wheel, she let out a slow breath and pressed her hands against the steering wheel, trying to ground herself. She knew this feeling all too well, the way it clawed at her, whispering that maybe, just maybe, she could let her guard down. But that was how it always started, wasn't it? That flicker of hope, followed by the inevitable disappointment. No. She wouldn't let herself go down that road again. But as much as she tried to push it away, Ethan's face, his voice, the way he looked at her, kept creeping back into her thoughts. This was going to be harder than she'd anticipated. Chapter 3, A Quiet Dinner. Anna stared at her reflection in the mirror, smoothing a wrinkle in her dress that wasn't really there. The invitation had caught her off guard earlier that day, Ethan casually asking if she had time for dinner to discuss the project in more detail. She could have refused, should have perhaps, but there had been something in his tone, in the way he smiled, that made her hesitate. Now, standing in her bedroom, she found herself feeling foolish for overthinking what was likely just a business meeting. Keep it professional, she reminded herself, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. This is just work. Still, when she arrived at Pier 23, an upscale restaurant with sweeping views of the San Francisco Bay, she couldn't help but feel like this was more than a simple business dinner. The place was dimly lit, intimate, with soft jazz playing in the background and the smell of fresh seafood drifting through the air. It felt too personal for a meeting about office layouts and design choices. Ethan was already there, sitting at a corner table near the window. His appearance, as always, was immaculate black button-down, sleeves rolled up just enough to look effortlessly cool. He stood as she approached, a warm smile on his face. Anna, he greeted, gesturing to the chair opposite him. I hope this place is okay. I thought it might be more comfortable than the usual work setting. She sat down, her posture deliberately stiff. It's nice, she replied, scanning the menu without really reading it. Her mind was already racing, trying to figure out what angle Ethan was playing at. Was this a professional courtesy or something else entirely? As they placed their orders and settled in, The conversation initially remained light, focused on the project, timelines, budgets, the logistics of working with the architecture firm's existing constraints. Ethan listened attentively, his gaze fixed on her in a way that made Anna feel both seen and scrutinized. But after their drinks arrived, the tone of the conversation began to shift. "So, how did you get into interior design?" Ethan asked, leaning back in his chair, his expression softening as he looked at her. "I mean, you're clearly passionate about it." Anna hesitated, unsure how much of herself she wanted to reveal. "It just happened," she said, swirling the wine in her glass. "I've always liked creating spaces, making things feel like home." Ethan smiled thoughtfully. "I get that. You know, I've always admired people who can turn a place into something meaningful. Architects can build structures, but making them feel alive, that's a whole other skill." His compliment caught her off guard, and she felt a flicker of warmth at his words. "Thanks," she said quietly, taking a sip of her wine. "But it's not always about making places feel like home. Sometimes it's just about order. Control." Ethan raised an eyebrow, picking up on the hint of something deeper in her tone. "Control?" Anna met his gaze for a moment before glancing away. "I don't know. After my divorce, I guess I found it easier to focus on things I could control, spaces, design. It helped me compartmentalize." Her words hung in the air between them, and she immediately regretted being so open. Why was she telling him this? She rarely talked about her divorce, especially with someone she barely knew. But something about Ethan, his calm, unhurried manner, made her feel safe. Too safe. Ethan nodded, his expression turning more serious. "I get that," he said quietly. "Sometimes it's easier to focus on work than other things." Anna looked at him, sensing a shift in the conversation. "What about you? You've mentioned your career and your travels, but you've never said much about your personal life." There was a pause, a flicker of hesitation in Ethan's eyes before he replied. "There's not much to say. I've made my career my life, too. Relationships, they tend to complicate things." It wasn't exactly an answer, and Anna noticed how he sidestepped the question. The way he held back only made her more curious, but she reminded herself that this wasn't her place to pry. Still, there was something in his tone that suggested he had his own emotional walls, ones not too dissimilar from her own. Their meals arrived, and the conversation shifted back to lighter topics, travel stories, amusing anecdotes about difficult clients, but the undercurrent of tension between them remained. Every time their eyes met across the table, Anna felt a pull, a magnetic draw that made her pulse quicken. Halfway through dinner, there was a moment when their hands brushed as Ethan reached for the salt. The touch was fleeting, almost accidental, but it sent a jolt through Anna's body. She immediately pulled her hand back, a rush of heat flooding her cheeks. Ethan noticed, his eyes darkening slightly, but he didn't comment. Instead, he continued speaking as though nothing had happened, but the unspoken charge between them grew heavier. As the evening drew to a close, Ethan leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on Anna once more. "You know," he said, his voice quieter now, "I wasn't sure if you'd say yes to dinner." Anna looked at him, her heart beating faster. "Why's that?" "I don't know," he admitted, a half-smile playing on his lips. "You seem hard to reach. Like you've got walls up." His words hit her harder than she expected, and for a second, she didn't know how to respond. He wasn't wrong. She had built walls, thick ones, around herself for protection. But the fact that he saw through them so easily unnerved her. "I guess I'm just careful," she said, her voice a little too sharp, trying to regain control of the conversation. Ethan didn't push. He simply nodded, acknowledging her boundaries, but there was a look in his eyes that told her he wasn't done testing them. When the bill was paid and they stood outside the restaurant, the cool night air was a welcome relief from the intensity of their dinner. Ethan turned to her, his expression softening once more. "Thanks for tonight," he said, his voice low. "I hope it wasn't too uncomfortable." Anna managed a smile, though it felt strained. It was fine. Ethan nodded, stepping back. Good night, Anna. Good night, she replied, watching him walk away before turning toward her car. As she drove home, her mind raced. Tonight had been more than she expected. More complicated, more revealing, more charged. She had opened up more than she ever intended to, and the realization unsettled her. For so long, she had been in control, keeping her emotions in check. But with Ethan, she wasn't sure how much longer she could keep her walls intact. Chapter 4: The Confession. The afternoon sun poured through the windows of Anna's loft, casting long, golden rays across the floor as she stood at her kitchen counter, mindlessly stirring a cup of tea. Her thoughts were anywhere but on the cup in her hands. Dinner with Ethan had left her more shaken than she cared to admit, and in the days since, her mind had been tangled with confusion and frustration. Why did she feel so exposed around him? And why, despite everything she'd told herself, was she drawn to him in ways she hadn't expected? But what troubled her most was the gnawing feeling that there was something Ethan wasn't telling her, something important. Her phone buzzed on the counter, interrupting her thoughts. She glanced at the screen and saw Ethan's name. For a moment, she considered ignoring it, but she knew she couldn't avoid him forever. Swallowing her unease, she answered. Hey, Ethan's voice came through, soft but cautious. Are you free tonight? I'd like to talk. About us. The word us hung in the air, making Anna's stomach flip. She wasn't sure what us meant at this point, but she couldn't deny the tension between them, the strange pull that kept her coming back despite her better judgment. Yeah, sure, she replied, her voice more guarded than she intended. Where? How about my place? 7 o'clock. Okay, she said, trying to sound casual, but her heart was already pounding in her chest. What was he going to say? Later that evening, Anna stood outside Ethan's apartment door, hesitating before finally knocking. It was the first time she'd been to his place, and as the door opened, she was struck by how different it was from her own. Where her loft was sleek and minimalist, his was warm, with rich wooden floors, bookshelves filled to the brim, and framed travel photos lining the walls. It was a space that felt lived in, real, a reflection of a man with depth. Come in, Ethan said, stepping aside to let her enter. His expression was softer than usual, as though he was carrying something heavy that he needed to unload. Anna walked in, scanning the room for a distraction, but her mind was already racing. She sat down on the couch, trying to brace herself for whatever was about to come. Ethan sat across from her, his elbows resting on his knees. For a long moment, he didn't speak, and the silence stretched between them until Anna couldn't take it anymore. You said you wanted to talk, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. So, talk. Ethan rubbed the back of his neck, looking uncomfortable for the first time since she'd met him. I've been meaning to tell you something for a while now, he began, his voice low. But I didn't know how. I wasn't sure when the right time would be, and now, I'm afraid it's going to sound worse because I didn't say it sooner. Anna's heartbeat quickened. She hated cryptic conversations, hated feeling like someone was keeping something from her. What is it? She pressed, her patience fraying. Ethan looked down at his hands before meeting her eyes. I've been married before. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Anna felt a strange sense of relief. It wasn't the worst thing he could have said, though it was surprising. Okay, she said slowly. That's fine. It's not like you owe me your life story. Ethan's jaw tightened. No, it's not just that. He hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. I was married to Rachel. Anna froze. Rachel? The name sent a shockwave through her body. Her mind raced, trying to piece it together. Rachel, her best friend from college. The woman she hadn't spoken to in years, after a messy falling out that had never fully been resolved. And now, Ethan had been married to her. What? The word slipped from Anna's lips in disbelief, barely more than a whisper. Rachel. Rachel Anderson? Ethan nodded, his face tense with guilt. Yes. We were married. Years ago. Anna stood up, her heart pounding in her chest, her hands shaking. You knew her. You were married to her, and you didn't think to tell me? All this time? Her voice rose in anger, sharp and accusing. I didn't know how to tell you, Ethan said, standing as well, though his tone was more controlled. I didn't want it to change how you see me, how you feel about me. And I wasn't sure if you were still in touch with her. That's not the point. Anna snapped, cutting him off. You knew my best friend. You were married to her, and you didn't say anything. You've been lying to me this whole time, keeping this from me. How could I trust anything you say after this? Ethan's face softened, but he didn't back down. I didn't lie to you, Anna. I just didn't know how to bring it up. Our marriage ended badly, and I've tried to move on from it. I never wanted it to be something that would get between us. Anna laughed bitterly, her voice shaking. Well, congratulations. It is between us now. She started pacing, trying to process the betrayal she felt. How long were you planning on keeping this from me? Until you decided it was convenient for you? Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in his expression. It's not like that. I swear. I didn't want to hurt you, and I didn't want to bring up old wounds. Anna stopped pacing and turned to face him, her voice dangerously calm. You think keeping this from me wouldn't hurt? That I wouldn't feel completely blindsided by this? Rachel was my best friend, Ethan. We lost touch, but we were like sisters. And now I find out you were married to her. What else are you hiding? I'm not hiding anything else, Ethan said firmly, stepping toward her, but Anna immediately took a step back. I don't even know what to believe anymore, she said, her voice cracking. She had let herself get close to him, let her walls down, and now everything felt like a lie. The room felt too small, too suffocating. Ethan reached out as if to calm her. Anna, please. Let me explain. But Anna wasn't ready to hear more. Her mind was racing, her emotions spinning out of control. Without another word, she grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door. Anna, Ethan called after her, his voice thick with regret, but she didn't stop. She yanked the door open and slammed it behind her, stepping out into the cool night air. She needed space. She needed time to think. All she could hear in her mind was the name Rachel echoing over and over again, along with the sound of her heart breaking, not just because of Ethan's lie, but because she felt like she was losing control all over again. Chapter 5. The Apology. The days after Anna stormed out of Ethan's apartment were a blur. She threw herself into work, sketching design concepts with a frantic energy that helped keep her mind from wandering. Every time her thoughts drifted back to that night, Rachel, Ethan, the lies, she buried herself deeper into her projects. But no matter how much she tried to ignore it, the weight of it all sat heavy in her chest. Her phone had been buzzing with messages from Ethan. Apologies. Requests to talk. Explanations she didn't want to hear. Each one went unread, the little notification bubbles piling up like unanswered questions. She needed space, needed time to process, but part of her couldn't shake the sense of unfinished business between them. It was Lila, her best friend since childhood, who finally pushed her to confront her feelings. Anna sat in Lila's cozy apartment one evening, nursing a glass of wine as she explained the situation in halting words. Lila listened quietly, her brow furrowed in thought, as Anna recounted the shock of Ethan's confession. I just don't get it, Anna said, her voice raw with frustration. Why would he keep something like that from me? He was married to Rachel. My best friend. How can I trust anything he says after that? Lila sighed, setting down her wineglass. Honestly, I get why you're angry. It's a huge thing to hide, especially given your history with Rachel. But she hesitated, searching for the right words. Maybe he just didn't know how to bring it up. Think about it, he's probably afraid you'd react exactly like this. I'm not saying he was right to keep it from you, but people do dumb things when they're scared. Anna bit her lip, her frustration warring with the uncomfortable truth of Lila's words. She wanted to stay angry, to hold on to the betrayal. It was easier that way. But deep down, she couldn't deny that part of her understood why Ethan had hesitated. Even if that's true, it doesn't change the fact that he lied. He knew how much Rachel meant to me, and he still didn't say anything. Lila nodded, her expression sympathetic but firm. I know. And you have every right to be upset. But what are you really mad about, Anna? That he didn't tell you about Rachel, or that you're starting to care about him and this makes it harder to trust him? Anna opened her mouth to respond but stopped, the words caught in her throat. Lila's question hit too close to the truth. She hated admitting it, but a big part of her anger wasn't just about the lie, it was about how vulnerable she had allowed herself to become. She had let Ethan in, and now she was paying the price. You need to figure out what you want, Lila said gently. Do you want to shut him out completely because of this, or do you want to give him a chance to explain? Because from what you've told me, it sounds like he cares about you. And you care about him. Anna stared at her glass, the wine swirling in slow, lazy circles. Did she care about Ethan? Yes. Despite everything, she did. But could she trust him? That was the harder question. And the one she wasn't sure she was ready to answer. A few more days passed before Anna finally texted Ethan back. She kept it brief, telling him they could talk, but not promising anything beyond that. His response came almost immediately, suggesting they meet at a small cafe near her place, one that was quiet and tucked away from the bustling streets. When Anna arrived, Ethan was already there, sitting at a table in the corner. He looked tense, his normally confident demeanor replaced with something softer, more uncertain. When he saw her, he stood, his expression a mixture of relief and guilt. Anna, he said, his voice low and careful. Thank you for meeting me. She nodded, sitting across from him. I almost didn't, she admitted, her tone blunt. But I think we need to talk. Ethan didn't flinch at her coldness. I know. I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner. I never meant to hurt you. Anna crossed her arms, her guard still firmly in place. Then why didn't you? Why wait until I had to practically drag it out of you? Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated with himself. Honestly, I didn't know how to. When I realized who you were, Rachel's friend, it freaked me out. I didn't want it to change things between us. I thought, if I could just wait until we got to know each other better, maybe you'd understand. But I realize now that was selfish. Anna watched him closely, trying to read between the lines. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that he wasn't just saying what she wanted to hear. But the wound was still fresh, and the walls she had built were higher than ever. What happened with you and Rachel? She asked, her voice softening slightly. Why did you get divorced? Ethan looked down at the table, his jaw tightening. It wasn't one thing. We were different people. I was younger, more ambitious, and I didn't handle things well. We fought a lot, and I wasn't always the best version of myself. He paused, as if searching for the right words. Rachel and I brought out the worst in each other. She deserved better than what I gave her. That's why I left, to start over. His words hung in the air, heavy with regret. Anna could see the pain in his eyes, the weight of his past pulling at him. And for the first time, she felt a flicker of empathy for him. Maybe he hadn't been perfect, maybe none of them were, but it sounded like he was trying to be better. I didn't want to hurt you, Anna, he said quietly. I care about you. I know it's hard to believe right now, but that's the truth. Anna looked at him, her anger beginning to thaw, replaced by a confusing mixture of emotions. Part of her wanted to push him away, to protect herself from getting hurt again. But another part of her, the part she tried to ignore, wanted to believe him. Wanted to give him a second chance. I don't know if I can trust you, she said finally, her voice trembling slightly. Ethan nodded, accepting her words without protest. I understand. But I'm willing to earn your trust, if you'll let me. They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of the decision hanging between them. Anna felt torn, pulled in two directions. But in the end, she knew she couldn't shut him out completely, not yet. Okay, she said softly. I'll give you a chance to explain. But don't expect this to be easy. Ethan smiled, though it was tinged with relief and caution. I don't. I'm glad you're willing to try. Chapter 6, Old Ghosts. Anna had just started to feel a sense of calm in the wake of her tense conversation with Ethan. They weren't back to where they had been before, but they were trying. That counted for something, didn't it? She wanted to believe that he was sincere in his apology, that his past was just that, the past. But there was still a part of her that couldn't fully let go of the unease that came with trusting him again. She had no idea how quickly that fragile piece was about to shatter. It started with a message, a simple, innocuous-looking email that popped up in her inbox late one evening as she was finalizing some designs. The subject line caught her attention immediately. We need to talk about Ethan. No signature. No preview of the content. Just those words. Her pulse quickened as she clicked on the message. The email was short but chilling. Anna, it's Rachel. I know you've been seeing Ethan. There's something you need to know. He's not who you think he is. I've been where you are, and trust me, it doesn't end well. Let's talk, before it's too late. Anna's breath caught in her throat. Rachel. After all these years, her former best friend was reaching out, and it was about Ethan. Her heart raced as she stared at the screen, her mind spinning with questions. Why now? Why hadn't Rachel contacted her earlier, before all of this? The past between them was messy, unresolved. They had drifted apart after college, not just because of life taking them in different directions, but because of a betrayal that still stung. Rachel had always been impulsive, emotionally volatile, and their falling out had been ugly. But now, here she was, resurfacing like some kind of ghost from a previous life, bringing accusations Anna wasn't ready to confront. Anna hesitated, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She didn't know if she wanted to hear whatever Rachel had to say, but at the same time, she couldn't just ignore it. After a long moment, she typed a quick reply, setting up a meeting for the next day. They met at a small cafe near the marina. Anna arrived early, her nerves on edge as she watched the entrance, waiting for the woman who had once been like a sister to her. When Rachel walked in, Anna barely recognized her. She looked older, more hardened, with sharp lines around her eyes and a bitterness in her expression that hadn't been there before. Time hadn't been kind to her. Anna, Rachel greeted, her voice cold but familiar. Rachel, Anna replied, feeling a strange mix of nostalgia and dread. They sat down, tension immediately thickening the air between them. Rachel didn't waste time on pleasantries. She leaned in, her eyes flashing with intensity. I know you're with Ethan, Rachel began, her voice low but full of venom. And I'm telling you, you need to get away from him. Now. Anna's stomach twisted. She had expected something like this, but hearing it out loud made it worse. What are you talking about, Rachel? What happened between you two? Rachel's eyes darkened, and her lips curled into a bitter smile. He didn't tell you the whole story, did he? Of course not. He never does. Ethan is charming, manipulative, and dangerous. I saw it. I lived it. Anna's throat tightened, but she tried to keep her composure. He told me you had a bad marriage. That you brought out the worst in each other. Rachel laughed, but it was a harsh, humorless sound. Is that what he said? That's convenient, isn't it? Ethan likes to play the victim. Likes to make you think everything's mutual, that he's just a guy who made some mistakes. But he's not. He's controlling, possessive, and when things don't go his way, he snaps. Anna felt a cold dread settle in her chest. Snaps. What are you saying, Rachel? Rachel leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. I'm saying that by the time I left him, I was terrified. He would follow me, show up at places he wasn't supposed to be. He never hit me, but the way he would look at me like I belonged to him, like he could snap my neck if I pushed him too far. Anna, I don't want to see you go through what I did. Anna's skin prickled with unease. The picture Rachel was painting didn't match the Ethan she knew, or did it? He had always been so careful around her, so in control of his emotions, but there had been moments, subtle ones, but moments nonetheless, where she had caught a glimpse of something darker in him. A flash of anger when she'd questioned him, a possessive edge to the way he talked about their relationship. You have to be careful, Anna, Rachel said, her tone urgent. He'll try to make you think it's all in your head. That you're the one overreacting. But it's not. He's dangerous. Anna swallowed hard, trying to process the torrent of emotions swirling inside her. Why didn't you tell me this before? She asked, her voice trembling. If he's so dangerous, why wait until now? Rachel's face hardened, a flicker of guilt crossing her features. Because I didn't think you'd listen. We haven't exactly been on speaking terms, have we? But when I found out you were with him, I couldn't just sit back and watch it happen again. Watch what happen again? Anna demanded, her voice rising. Rachel, what aren't you telling me? Rachel's gaze flickered, something darker passing behind her eyes. There are things I don't want to relive, she said softly. Things that still haunt me. But trust me, Anna, you don't want to find out what happens when you get too close to him. Anna stared at her, her heart pounding in her chest. Was Rachel telling the truth? Or was this some twisted attempt to sabotage her relationship, born out of jealousy or resentment from the past? She didn't know what to believe anymore. When Anna confronted Ethan later that evening, she was still reeling from her conversation with Rachel. She met him at his apartment, tension crackling in the air the moment she stepped inside. Rachel contacted me, Anna said, her voice tight. She told me some things about you. About your marriage. Ethan froze, the color draining from his face. What did she say? She said you were controlling. Dangerous. That she was afraid of you by the time she left. Ethan's jaw clenched, and for a moment, Anna thought she saw a flash of anger in his eyes, just as Rachel had described. But it was gone just as quickly, replaced by a pained expression. Anna, that's not true, he said, his voice taut with emotion. Rachel and I had a toxic relationship, yes, but I was never dangerous. I never hurt her. She's twisting things to make me look like the bad guy because she doesn't want to take responsibility for her part in it. Then why does she sound so scared of you? Anna demanded, her voice rising. Why does she think you'll do the same thing to me? Ethan's eyes darkened. Because Rachel is bitter. She's angry that I left. She's angry that I moved on, and now she's trying to ruin what we have. Anna shook her head, her mind spinning with doubt. I don't know what to believe anymore, Ethan. Ethan stepped toward her, his expression pleading. Believe me, Anna. I care about you. I would never hurt you. Rachel's just trying to manipulate you, just like she tried to manipulate me. But Rachel's words echoed in Anna's mind, chilling her to the core. You don't want to find out what happens when you get too close to him. Chapter 7, Breaking Point. Anna sat alone in her apartment, the city lights flickering through the large windows. The darkness outside felt oppressive, mirroring the turmoil brewing inside her. Rachel's accusations swirled in her mind like a storm she couldn't escape. She'd been avoiding Ethan for days, unsure of how to move forward. Every time her phone buzzed with a message from him, her chest tightened with anxiety, torn between wanting to hear from him and dreading what more might be revealed. The weight of uncertainty was becoming unbearable. She couldn't keep avoiding him, couldn't keep living in limbo between trusting her feelings for him and the warnings from her past. She needed the truth, all of it. It was time to confront him. Anna grabbed her keys, throwing on her coat, and drove to Ethan's apartment. The entire way there, her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her thoughts racing. Was she making a mistake? Could she even handle what he was about to tell her? She didn't know, but she couldn't live in this purgatory of doubt any longer. When she knocked on Ethan's door, he opened it almost immediately. His face was tense, his eyes dark with exhaustion and something else, something like fear. It was clear that he had been waiting for this moment, too. "Anna," he said, his voice soft, filled with both relief and hesitation. "I didn't think you'd come." "I didn't think I would either," Anna replied, stepping inside. "But we need to talk. I need answers." Ethan nodded, closing the door behind her. "I know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll tell you everything." They stood in the middle of his living room, the air thick with tension. Ethan motioned for her to sit, but Anna remained standing, her arms crossed defensively. "I don't even know where to start," she said, her voice sharp with frustration. "Rachel told me things that don't match up with what you've told me. I need to know the truth, Ethan. I need to know who you really are." Ethan's shoulders slumped slightly, his confident facade finally cracking. "I haven't been completely honest with you," he admitted, his voice low. "Not because I wanted to lie, but because I was scared. I've tried to leave that part of my life behind, but it keeps finding a way to haunt me." Anna's heart pounded in her chest as she listened, the words not enough to soothe the dread curling in her stomach. "What do you mean, that part of your life? What aren't you telling me?" Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his gaze dropping to the floor as if he couldn't bear to look at her. "Rachel wasn't lying when she said I was difficult to be with. I wasn't a good husband to her. I was jealous. Possessive. I had a lot of issues, mental health issues, that I didn't know how to deal with back then." Anna's breath caught. She had braced herself for this, but hearing the words still sent a jolt through her. "So, what? You're saying you were toxic? That you manipulated her, like she said?" "I wasn't physically abusive," Ethan said quickly, his eyes snapping up to meet hers. "But mentally, emotionally. I didn't handle things well. My jealousy got the better of me. I couldn't stand the thought of losing control. I was paranoid, always convinced she was hiding things from me, and it drove her away." Anna felt the floor tilt beneath her. Her worst fears were coming true, but the anguish on Ethan's face told her that this wasn't the whole story. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" she demanded, her voice cracking. "Why wait until now? Why let me get close to you without knowing all of this?" "Because I'm not that person anymore," Ethan said, stepping toward her, his hands reaching out but stopping just short of touching her. "I've worked hard to change. I got help after Rachel left, therapy, everything. I'm not proud of who I was back then, but I'm not him anymore. I swear to you, Anna." Anna's mind reeled. "But Rachel said you were dangerous, that she was scared of you." Ethan's face twisted in pain. "I was never dangerous, Anna. I never hurt her. But I was suffocating. I can see that now. I smothered her because I was scared of losing her, and in the end, that's exactly what I did. She was right to leave me." The room felt stifling, the walls closing in as Anna tried to make sense of everything. Could she believe him? Could she trust that he had changed? Or was this just another version of the story he wanted her to hear? "I don't know if I can do this," Anna said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can trust you after all of this." Ethan's expression crumbled, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked completely vulnerable. "I know it's hard to trust me right now. I don't expect you to just forgive me overnight. But I care about you, Anna. I've been trying so hard to leave the past behind, to be someone better. I didn't want to lose you, too." Anna stared at him, her emotions in turmoil. Part of her wanted to believe him, to believe that people could change, that he was trying to be better. But another part of her, the part that had been hurt, betrayed, and lied to before, screamed at her to run, to protect herself before it was too late. "You should go," she said, her voice trembling with the weight of the decision. "I need time to think. I can't do this right now." Ethan looked stricken, but he didn't argue. He simply nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "Okay," he whispered. "I'll give you space. But please, just know that I'm not that man anymore. And I'm sorry." He turned and walked toward the door, each step heavy with regret. As he left, Anna sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. She felt utterly torn, her heart and mind battling for control. She had wanted the truth, and now she had it, but it only left her more uncertain than ever. The apartment was silent, save for the muffled sounds of the city outside. In that silence, Anna realized the choice she faced was no longer about Ethan's past, but about her future. Could she take the risk of letting him back into her life, knowing what she knew now? Or would she forever wonder if she'd made a mistake by pushing him away? As the night stretched on, Anna knew one thing for certain: no matter what choice she made, it would change everything. Chapter 8: Rock Bottom. The days that followed Ethan's confession were a blur of solitude and silence. Anna buried herself in her work, throwing all of her energy into designs and projects, trying to numb the confusion and hurt that had settled deep inside her. But no matter how much she immersed herself in color palettes and furniture layouts, there was no escaping the emptiness that gnawed at her. She had stopped responding to Ethan's messages. Rachel, too, had reached out a few times, but Anna ignored her as well. She didn't have the strength to face either of them. What was the point? Her head was a mess, and nothing made sense anymore. The more she tried to rationalize everything, the more tangled her emotions became. Work had always been her refuge, but now even that wasn't enough to drown out the ache she felt. The sharp edges of loneliness crept in, and no matter how many hours she spent sketching or refining details for clients, her mind would inevitably drift back to the last few weeks. To Ethan, to Rachel, and to the emotional wound that had been ripped wide open. Late one night, as Anna sat at her desk, staring blankly at the glowing screen of her laptop, the realization began to settle in her chest like a heavy weight. The tears that had been threatening to fall finally spilled over, and she pressed her palms to her face, letting the sobs come. It wasn't just about Ethan, or Rachel. The hurt ran deeper than that. She had thought she'd moved on from her past, from the heartbreak of her failed marriage to Jacob. She had spent the last 2 years convincing herself that she was fine, that her life was better off without him. But now, with the trust issues surfacing once again, she knew the truth. She hadn't healed. She had just built walls around the pain, hoping they would be strong enough to keep it hidden. But the walls had cracked. They had started to crumble the moment she let Ethan in, and now she was standing at the edge of her own emotional wreckage, terrified of falling into it. This wasn't just about Ethan or the lies. It was about her inability to trust, her fear of letting people in, and the scars she had never really confronted. Jacob had left her with wounds that ran deeper than she cared to admit. She had been so afraid of getting hurt again that she closed herself off, not just to the possibility of love, but to any kind of true connection. Ethan had shown her that. And now, facing the wreckage of both her past and her present, Anna knew she couldn't keep running from it. She needed help. The next morning, with heavy eyes and a heart weighed down by exhaustion, Anna found herself staring at her phone. The name on the screen was one she hadn't called in years, Dr. Laura Hayes, her old therapist. She had seen Dr. Hayes briefly after her divorce, but she had stopped going when she convinced herself that she was fine, that she didn't need therapy to move on. But now, she knew she couldn't handle this alone. Her thumb hovered over the call button for a long moment before she finally pressed it. The line rang once, twice, and then a familiar, warm voice answered. "Dr. Hayes," she said, her voice gentle and professional. Anna hesitated, suddenly unsure of what to say. Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to speak. "Hi, Dr. Hayes. It's Anna Davis. I don't know if you remember me, But I think I need to talk. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and then Dr. Hayes's voice softened. Of course I remember you, Anna. I'm glad you called. Why don't we set up a time to meet? A few days later, Anna found herself sitting in Dr. Hayes's office. The room was exactly how she remembered it, soft, neutral tones, a comfortable chair across from Dr. Hayes's desk, and the soothing sound of a small water fountain trickling in the corner. It was the kind of space that invited openness, but today, Anna felt anything but open. She sat with her arms crossed tightly across her chest, her foot tapping nervously against the floor. Dr. Hayes sat across from her, calm and patient, waiting for Anna to speak first. It took a while, but eventually, the words started to come, slow and hesitant at first, but then pouring out in a rush of emotion. I thought I was fine, Anna said, her voice strained. After Jacob, I thought I'd moved on. But now, I don't know. Everything with Ethan, with Rachel, it's all brought back so much. And I can't help but feel like maybe it's not just them. Maybe it's me. Dr. Hayes nodded gently, her expression thoughtful. What do you think has been brought back? Anna exhaled, her voice trembling. The fear. The trust issues. I keep pushing people away because I'm so scared of getting hurt again. I thought I was over it. But I'm not. I'm still so angry, so scared, and I don't know how to fix it. Dr. Hayes leaned forward slightly, her tone soft but probing. You're realizing that the pain from your past, your marriage, the betrayal you experienced is still affecting you. And it sounds like it's affecting not just your relationship with Ethan, but your ability to connect with anyone on a deeper level. Is that right? Anna nodded, feeling the weight of those words settle over her. I didn't want to admit it, she whispered. I've been so focused on building this perfect life, my career, my independence, but I've been hiding behind it. Hiding from the fact that I'm still hurt, still broken in some ways. Dr. Hayes smiled softly. That's a powerful realization, Anna. A difficult one, but an important step. Healing doesn't happen by pretending we're okay. It happens by confronting the things we've been running from. Anna looked down at her hands, feeling the truth of those words sink in. She had been running for so long, running from her past, from her pain, from the possibility of getting hurt again. But where had it gotten her? She was still alone, still afraid. What if I can't fix it? Anna asked, her voice small. What if I'm too messed up to ever trust anyone again? Dr. Hayes's expression remained calm, unwavering. You're not messed up, Anna. You've been hurt, and you've built walls to protect yourself. But those walls don't have to be permanent. You've already taken the first step by recognizing that they are there. And now, it's about learning how to break them down. The session continued, with Anna opening up in ways she hadn't allowed herself to in years. She talked about Jacob, about the betrayal that had shattered her trust in people. She talked about how she had thrown herself into her work, using her career as a shield to protect herself from any emotional vulnerability. And she talked about Ethan, about how, despite everything, she couldn't deny the connection she felt with him, even if it terrified her. Dr. Hayes listened patiently, offering gentle insights and guiding Anna through her tangled emotions. By the time the session ended, Anna felt emotionally drained, but there was also a strange sense of relief. For the first time in a long time, she had allowed herself to be truly vulnerable, to confront the pain she had been hiding from. As she walked out of Dr. Hayes's office and into the crisp afternoon air, Anna knew she wasn't magically healed. There was still so much work to be done, and the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. But for the first time, she felt like she was moving in the right direction. She had taken the first step toward healing, and that was something. She pulled out her phone, staring at Ethan's number in her contacts. She wasn't ready to call him yet, wasn't ready to dive back into the complexity of their relationship. But she knew that eventually, she would have to face that, too. For now, though, she would focus on herself. on healing the wounds that had been festering for far too long. And for the first time in years, Anna felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could. Chapter 9, A Second Chance. The crisp autumn air brushed against Anna's cheeks as she walked through the park, her heart pounding in her chest. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, weeks of therapy, reflection, and soul-searching. But no matter how many times she rehearsed what she wanted to say, no matter how much progress she'd made in understanding her own pain, the fear of facing Ethan again weighed heavily on her. She had texted him 2 days ago, asking if they could meet. His reply had been instant, almost as if he had been waiting for her to reach out. They agreed to meet in a quiet park near her apartment, a neutral space where they could talk without the distractions of the city around them. Now, as she made her way toward the bench where they had agreed to meet, she felt the familiar tug of anxiety in her chest. When she spotted him, sitting with his elbows on his knees and his hands clasped in front of him, her heart ached. He looked different, tired, worn down, as if the weight of the past few weeks had taken a toll on him, too. For a moment, she stood there, watching him from a distance, wondering if she was making the right choice. But then Ethan looked up and met her gaze, and the vulnerability in his eyes pulled her forward. "Hey," Anna said softly as she approached the bench. Her voice was steady, but she could feel the nerves fluttering in her stomach. Ethan stood, his expression uncertain but filled with hope. "Hey," he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. He motioned toward the bench. "Do you want to sit?" She nodded, sitting down next to him but leaving a small space between them. The silence stretched for a long moment, and Anna struggled to find the right words to break it. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she began, her hands resting in her lap, fingers nervously twisting together. "About everything. About us." Ethan's shoulders tensed, and he turned slightly to face her, his eyes filled with anticipation and worry. "And?" Anna took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "I can't deny that I care about you, Ethan. A lot. But I've also realized that I've been carrying a lot of baggage from my past. I've been so afraid of getting hurt again that I didn't allow myself to fully trust you. And then, when everything came out about Rachel, it just brought all of that fear back to the surface." Ethan's face tightened with regret, and he nodded slowly. "I know. And I wish I'd told you about Rachel sooner. I should have been honest from the start, but I was scared. I was scared of losing you before we even had a chance." Anna looked down at her hands, her voice soft but steady. "I get that now. And I understand why you didn't tell me. But moving forward, if we're going to have any kind of chance, there can't be any more secrets. I can't go through that again. I need to know that I can trust you completely." Ethan's expression crumbled, and he reached for her hand, though he stopped just short of touching her, as if he wasn't sure if she would let him. His voice was thick with emotion as he spoke. "I know I messed up, Anna. I know I hurt you by keeping the truth from you, and I'm so sorry for that. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted to be the reason you felt unsafe." Tears welled up in his eyes, and he blinked them away quickly, his voice breaking as he continued. "I'm terrified of losing you. I know I don't deserve another chance, but if you'll let me, I swear I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. I don't want to lose you, Anna. I love you." The rawness in his voice, the vulnerability he had always tried to keep hidden, broke through Anna's defenses. She felt the tears sting her eyes, her heart torn between the desire to protect herself and the pull she still felt toward him. "I don't want to lose you either," Anna admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I need to know that we can rebuild this, from the ground up. No more lies, no more secrets. Just honesty. That's the only way this can work." Ethan nodded quickly, his eyes filled with hope. "I'll be honest. From now on, everything will be on the table. I promise. I want us to have a real chance." Anna turned to face him fully, her gaze searching his, trying to gauge if she could believe him. She could see the sincerity in his eyes, the way his entire body seemed to radiate a desperate need for her forgiveness, for another chance. But she also knew that trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. "I'm willing to try," Anna said quietly, her voice steady. "But I need time. I need to take things slow. I don't want to rush back into something and end up hurt again. We need to rebuild this piece by piece." Ethan's shoulders sagged with relief, and he reached for her hand again, this time gently wrapping his fingers around hers. "I can do that," he said softly. "I'll give you as much time as you need. Thank you, Anna. Thank you for giving me another chance." They sat in silence for a few moments, their hands intertwined, the weight of their conversation hanging between them. It wasn't a fairy tale reconciliation, and Anna knew there was still so much work to be done, but this felt like the first step in the right direction. "I've been working on myself too," Anna admitted after a while, her voice soft. "I've been seeing a therapist, trying to deal with some of the stuff I've been avoiding for a long time. And I realized that it's not just about you. It's about me too. I've been so afraid of letting anyone get close to me because I was still carrying around all this hurt from my marriage to Jacob. I didn't trust him, and when he betrayed me, it broke something inside me. I've been holding on to that pain for years." Ethan squeezed her hand gently, his expression filled with understanding. "I didn't know. I mean, I knew you'd been hurt, but I didn't realize it was still weighing on you like that." "I didn't either," Anna said with a sad smile. "I thought I'd moved on, but I hadn't. And I know that if we're going to try this again, I have to let go of that. I have to trust you not just because I want to, but because I have to for my own sake." Ethan nodded, his eyes filled with tenderness. "I get it. And I'll do whatever I can to earn that trust. I'm not perfect, but I'm willing to work on myself too. I don't want to be the man I was with Rachel. I want to be better." Anna looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in weeks, she felt something shift inside her. It wasn't a rush of certainty, but it was a glimmer of hope. Maybe people could change. Maybe she could change too. "Then let's take it slow," she said softly, her voice filled with cautious optimism. "We start from the beginning. And we take it one step at a time." Ethan smiled through his tears, his relief palpable. "One step at a time," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. They sat there, in the quiet park, the world moving around them, but for once, time seemed to slow. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, and Anna knew that. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was standing on solid ground. And maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. Chapter 10, Closure. The soft sound of footsteps echoed across the quiet street as Anna and Ethan walked side by side. They hadn't spoken much, but the silence between them felt different now, less heavy, more peaceful. There was no rush to fill the space with words, no need to explain or justify. They both knew this was only the beginning, a fragile new chapter they were stepping into together. It had been a few weeks since their conversation in the park, and although things were still tentative, there had been a subtle shift between them. They had started meeting more regularly, taking walks like this, having long, honest talks over coffee, sharing pieces of themselves that they had once kept hidden. It wasn't the kind of intense, whirlwind romance that movies and books so often promised. It was quieter, slower, but somehow it felt more real. As they walked toward the pier, the evening sky fading into shades of pink and purple, Anna glanced over at Ethan. He seemed lost in thought, his brow slightly furrowed, his hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket. She had always been drawn to the way he carried himself, calm, composed, but with an intensity beneath the surface. Now, after everything they had been through, she could see the cracks in that composure, the vulnerability he had fought so hard to hide. And yet, that vulnerability was what made her trust him now. He wasn't pretending to be perfect anymore. Neither of them were. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked softly, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Ethan smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Just thinking about how different things feel now, he said quietly. How much has changed? Anna nodded, feeling the weight of his words. It's strange, isn't it? How everything can fall apart, and then somehow, piece by piece, you start putting it back together. Ethan glanced at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of tenderness and gratitude. I didn't think we'd get here, he admitted. I thought I'd lost you. Anna stopped walking, turning to face him. The soft glow of the streetlights illuminated his face, and for the first time, she didn't feel the need to hold back. There was a time when I thought the same thing, she said, her voice gentle but steady. But I think we both needed to break a little. To face the things we were running from. Ethan nodded, his expression thoughtful. I think you're right. They continued walking in silence until they reached the pier, where the waves lapped gently against the wooden posts. The familiar scent of salt water filled the air, and Anna breathed it in, letting the sound of the ocean calm her restless thoughts. They found a bench near the edge of the pier and sat down, side by side. The horizon stretched out before them, vast and endless, like the future they were cautiously stepping into. Anna felt a sense of peace settle over her, a quiet, steady kind of peace that she hadn't felt in a long time. I'm sorry it took so long for us to get here, Ethan said after a while, his voice soft and full of regret. I'm sorry for all the mistakes I made. Anna looked at him, her heart swelling with a mix of emotions, sadness for the pain they had both endured, but also hope for what lay ahead. We both made mistakes, she said, her voice gentle. But we're not the same people we were when we first met. We've both grown, faced things we needed to face. Ethan turned to her, his eyes searching hers. Do you really believe we can move forward? That we can make this work? Anna smiled softly, feeling the weight of his question. I do, she said. But it's going to take time. We're rebuilding, and that's not something we can rush. But I believe in us, Ethan. I believe we can make it work if we're both willing to try. He reached for her hand, his touch warm and steady. I'm willing, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I'll do whatever it takes. Anna squeezed his hand gently, her heart full. She had never imagined that they would end up here, that after everything, they would find a way back to each other. But life, she had learned, was unpredictable. And love was messy, complicated, full of twists and turns. It was never as simple as the stories made it seem. But that didn't mean it wasn't worth fighting for. They sat there for a long time, watching the waves roll in, talking about everything and nothing, about their hopes, their fears, their dreams for the future. There were no grand promises, no declarations of a perfect life ahead. Just the quiet understanding that they were in this together, one step at a time. At one point, Ethan turned to her, his voice soft and vulnerable. I've been thinking about what you said, about trust and honesty. I want you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what. And I'll never hide anything from you again. I want us to be open, to build something real. Anna looked at him, feeling the sincerity in his words. She knew there were still scars from the past, wounds that hadn't fully healed. But she also knew that they had both changed. They had both learned from their mistakes. I trust you, she said quietly. And I'll be honest with you, too. I'm still figuring things out, but I want this. I want us. Ethan's eyes shimmered with emotion, and for the first time in a long time, Anna felt a sense of peace settle over her. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from knowing everything would be perfect, it was the peace that came from accepting that life wasn't perfect. That love wasn't perfect. But it was worth the risk. As the night deepened and the stars began to appear in the sky above, Anna leaned into Ethan, resting her head on his shoulder. They didn't need to say anything more. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, that didn't scare her. In the quiet of that moment, as the waves continued their rhythmic dance against the shore, Anna smiled to herself. She had spent so much of her life afraid of getting hurt, of letting people in, of taking chances. But now, as she sat beside the man she had once feared she'd lost, she realized something important. Love was never simple. It was messy, it was difficult, and sometimes it hurt. But it was also beautiful. And in the end, it was worth the risk.